Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Calm is Hot. We have a very special guest. I'd love for you to introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Dr. Rebecca DiVerniero. I'm a former college professor. I taught communication studies for 18 years. My PhD is in interpersonal communication. So I now use that to help socially anxious adults learn about communication, manage their fears, and realize they have a lot more worth than they think they do.
Whoa. That's incredible. It's also, I think, necessary given the state of the world.
Well, yeah, it's just there's so many negative messages coming at so many people that I want to be there to be like, you get a say in all
Th-
this.
That's beautiful. I love that energy. That's why I'm excited to have a conversation with you today. Could you also let our audience know your pronouns?
Oh yes, my pronouns are she, her.
And what is one way you're experiencing joy?
Well, really, my most special joyful moments every day are rubbing all my pets' bellies. So I take about half an hour out at least a day to just rub their bellies. They
Oh,
deserve to be adored.
oh, I love that. That's super cute. What kind of pets do you have?
I have a very chunky turkey mix. She's 11. Her name is Albus, like the wizard. I also have a very skinny tortie cat named Lola. She is going to be 16 soon. And a very chunky tuxedo cat named Smudge.
Oh my gosh, adorable. I feel like animals bring joy into the world and they're just like so pure. I love animals. They're the cutest.
Yeah. All they ask for is belly rubs and food.
Yeah. Yeah, truly. We're so blessed and lucky to have them. I want to dive in a little bit, if you're okay with that, by asking because you've been in academia for 18 years, you've got the PhD. What was kind of your trajectory like? What got you into pursuing interpersonal communication specifically?
Well, I actually got my bachelor's in journalism, but I always enjoyed my interpersonal courses much more because you get to talk about yourself. So, it's the main point. And I ended up not liking being a journalist. So a year later, I went back to school and got a master's in interpersonal communication. And I realized that I could process a lot of the things I didn't totally get about myself or my life so far. And I wanted to help students do that. So I think a week into my master's program, I was like, I have to do this for a living. So that I immediately decided after this of getting the PhD, went off to Nebraska for 4 years, got the PhD, and that was when I was 28. So I'm now 41. I just left academia in May.
Congratulations about your departure and venture into a new chapter of your life.
Thank you. It's a perfect midlife crisis choice.
Yay! Yeah, new career.
Yeah.
That's awesome. So, I guess I'm curious to know in those years before we kind of dive into what you're currently doing, in those years, can you kind of sum up and give us a little bit about your journey of that self discovery? Maybe certain things and aspects about interpersonal communication or relating it to anxiety, relating it to self discovery that really helped you feel maybe like things just made sense.
hmm The first thing that comes to mind is dating and of course that causes anxiety for a lot of people. You want someone you find attractive to be attracted to you, but there's also so much more to it. And in spite of what students might think, ghosting was a thing long before dating apps. And I kept getting ghosted over and over by men I had just met or men I had been in a relationship for a year or more. And when I think maybe the second or third week that I was getting my master's, my professor talked about the idea of withdrawal and how dehumanizing it is. And that was essentially what these men were doing. They were pretending I didn't exist as a way to avoid conflict when they were done with me, or to make it seem like there was never a conflict at all. And I also finally understood my feelings. I was being treated like I was less than a human. So things like that really helped me frame my life differently, and get that I wasn't the problem, because it's also, in literature, because it happens to a lot of people. So just understanding my lived life with things like that. I also did a lot of work understanding things like bereavement and grief, because my father died when I was really young. I was 7, he just dropped dead. And so I wasn't really given space to understand that, or deal with the ramifications, or talk about my emotions. And suddenly that was a place where I could do it, and I could get awards at conferences for doing it. So communication was my savior, really, in understanding interpersonal communication, both for managing my own emotions and understanding them, and also understanding why some relationships work and some don't, and how that's okay.
Wow, I wanna take a moment and just offer you some space to kinda just acknowledge what you shared. I think so many people do not have the language or the privilege or the opportunity or ability to process loss, to process the pain that accompanies that loss. And I think there's something that's very unique that happens when someone so young experiences such a severe degree, such a that magnitude of loss and pain. And I'm so grateful that you are open and honest and sharing how communication kind of helped you be able to
Mhm.
go back to that and figure out, wait a minute, this was a hugely significant moment that changed the course of my life. And I want to know what to do with it.
Yeah, and it wasn't just literally the deaths, because obviously that was significant, but
Yeah.
it was the communication around me at the time. People that I went to school with acted like I had some sort of disease that was contagious. After my father died, my family wouldn't let me talk about it, because they didn't want to think about it. And so things like that, was the communication that was surrounding me that caused a good portion of the trauma of that time. And school and studying communication was the first time I really got to process it. So I'll always remember that fondly, even though it's obviously an unpleasant processing trauma. It was desperately needed.
Yeah, yeah. I just want to relate for a second before we move forward and share as well, because you just have that. I think part of finding myself in communication studies and unraveling all of these things from my childhood and youth were also similarly connected to how I had a lack of opportunity to communicate about the things that I experienced, death and loss and grief, pain, etcetera, that, a lot of my friends couldn't relate to, or that my family just didn't wanna talk about. And so, similarly, I was like, communication is where it's at for me.
Yeah, really, there's so much information about the things you've been worried about for so long, and it's normal to talk about your thoughts and emotions in the interpersonal communication world. It's great.
Yes. Now, moving forward, you develop the skills, you're learning about it. And it's also now a lot of the tools and things you learn are applicable to other aspects of your life, like dating. Do you want to dive more into that or touch back on that?
Sure. And really the main concept I was going to touch on, I can touch on right now, because they're very much tied. Just the idea of interpersonal power, which is how much control you perceive you have in a situation. I found that especially once I turned 30, everyone around me thought, well, if you were a decent person, you'd be married with children right now. And because you are not married with children right now, I can say and do whatever I want to you. And so this kind of incessant commenting on who I must be because I was not married with children really made the dating experience much more awful than it needed to be. And every time I was met with that attitude, I would say, there's not actually a law requiring me to do any of those things. And there's certainly not one saying that I have to do it at a certain point. And so I would push back. And a lot of the people that I interacted with were very irritated by that I would ever think of myself as more of a person or someone who has choice when society demands this thing. And and so, that happens in a lot of situations that I'll get into later. But when it came to dating, if I didn't have that communication background, I might have been badgered into getting married to someone I didn't want, feeling lucky that anyone was willing to marry me since I was 30. And God, your life ends at 25. So why are you single at 30? Or being pressured into having a child, which was something that almost happened when I was in my late 20s. And so I'm still unmarried and childless, and I really like it that way. I have a live-in partner. We're very happy with our lives, but the pressure is still there. Even though I'm not actively dating anymore, we went to a meetup about a year ago. And when we walk in as a couple, people are down our throat with, where are your children? Why aren't you married? What are you even doing here? You should be off having babies. Like, you don't get a say in any of that. Why do you think, and it's not like it's people my age and older. I would understand because that is a generational expectation, but 20-year-olds say that to me. And so because of that, there is something going on with how much interpersonal power people seem to think that they have and how other people live their lives, even if that life has nothing to do with them and affects them in no way. I didn't murder someone. I just didn't have children.
You know what? This makes me think of how, like, anytime someone pushes back from like what the social norms are at large. So we know we can name one of the social norms is the expectation across the globe is for people to like have kids, right? Because cultures around the world alike are obsessed with like procreation and like the progress of human civilization.
Yeah.
Clearly, I'm not a part of it. I'm I'm definitely not. But so there's that expectation. And when you kind of move away from it, when you deviate, when you challenge it, it makes everyone else be confronted with the reality that maybe they bought into something that actually isn't for them, and that could freak people out, that could make people uncomfortable. It can make people feel like they wanna get you in line to be good. Oh my gosh, there's so much we could go in. Oh my
Oh, I could easily write another dissertation about that by itself.
goodness. I mean, I hope I'm not speaking for you. These are some of the things that I talk about in my classes with my students who also we talk about this pressure culturally. My classes are very diverse, students from all over the world, all backgrounds. And that is just one of the things that will that pressure. It it's
Mhm.
it's so intense.
Yes, and when I've talked to students about things like reproductive rights, they assume I'm just talking about abortion, and I'm like, "No, I mean literally the choice to have a child or not have one. Not to be pregnant and, have an abortion, but to literally just never get pregnant to begin with." People are horrified. And it's like, well, you better have an explanation for me. And, at worst, and if, science forbid your answer is that you just don't want them as opposed to you can't have them or you've had trouble getting pregnant, then you owe me a child. Like, okay, stranger, I'm just quietly sitting here existing without children and you're losing your mind over it. It's not like I run around telling other people don't have kids. It's how I've chosen to live my life, and that really upsets people.
That to me is like simultaneously like just jaw drop shocking and also not surprising at all. Like I because I witness mostly like how a lot of my friends are treated and these discussions I have with my students and it's like your value. That's one of the things, power. I want to go back to that because you mentioned that your internal power and the power that you have in relation to these larger social expectations, you're challenging it unapologetically. And you're basically saying like, no, there are other options and there should be
Yeah.
other options. And I think for me, that's, like, literally my entire MO. I'm like, I know what everybody else is doing. Like, what are the other options?
Well, and I've also asked people, is the only reason you wanna have children because other people do that? Because that's not gonna be a great relationship between you and your child. Do it if you want to, but don't do it because other people are having kids.
It's almost like keeping up with the Joneses, which then
Wow.
turned into keeping up with the Kardashians, where now there's this weird societal pressure, especially in smaller communities, where, like, once people start doing stuff and everybody starts talking about it or communicating about it, the pressure intensifies almost.
Yeah, and I had something else to say and I forgot. But yeah, it's exhausting that something so simple equates to that much pressure, and that's what I was gonna say, that it's comments like that that create social anxiety to begin with. I'm not afraid to have those conversations, but the extreme anger that tends to come at me makes me not really wanna socialize because I don't wanna have to explain myself every time I leave the house. And so, certainly, if you've never learned about communication, you haven't had much value in terms of education, you really probably do think, I have to do what these people say or I will be shunned. And a lot of times you will be shunned, but you have to, be comfortable with who you are. So I've been really pushing self esteem to the people I work with because without it, you really are at the whim of whatever the angry person who doesn't know you thinks
Or
or can't.
sometimes even knows you.
Right. Or your parent
Yes,
thinks.
yeah. Parent, relatives, the communities you're a part of, a lot of the times religious groups
Mhm.
really push that on their communities,
Yeah.
and it's so intense. I kinda wanna just thank you and honor you in this moment for speaking to this because as you mentioned, there are so many anxieties that are like caused by this, and I'm interested to know if you're open to talking a little bit more about that because I'm sure someone out there is relating.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, social anxiety is, I think, one of the more interesting disorders because, yes, you can be born with the brain structure for those anxious messages to blow through your brain, like warning signals that don't actually have to do with danger, but environment causes social anxiety as well. And whether you are born with the brain structure for it or not, you can be turned into a socially anxious person because of the communication that comes your way. And that's why I think it's inherently a communication issue, not because the socially anxious person can't communicate, but because of the kind of communication they have to sit through every time they try to do anything. I was just talking to my partner's sister over the weekend, and she was talking about how, she's definitely not got social anxiety disorder, but when she got pregnant and had her child, the kinds of things people would say to her, demand of her, they would just reach over and touch her belly and then, demand anytime she's out with her child, she better have a second child to keep it company. All of these messages that come at you constantly, just it made her not really want to socialize because there's so much judgment, and that is what social anxiety is, as at its core. It's the fear of judgment, and it doesn't, I don't think, have to just be fear. It's just being exhausted by all the judgment, and that can equate to social anxiety too, because you just don't see the point if everyone's going to be so critical of everything you do and say.
Huh? This just hit so close to home. Like, I'm feeling like I've had so many conversations with students, friends, people I know about how we get to a point of just sheer exhaustion, of being burned out to the point where we no longer want to participate in things that we used to find joy in or used to be very, involved in, even relationships, because that judgment, those pressures, they fuel a lot of those anxieties. And that's really frustrating.
Yeah, so one of the main goals with my clients and I is to help them find their people,
Mm,
because I mean everyone's going to have something to say, and I think part of friendship is teasing and pointing out when someone's maybe overstepping in terms of being too loud or too drunk or whatever else. But the it seems like a lot of socially anxious people and a lot of young people, and sometimes obviously that overlaps, the main goal is to fit in and have everyone like you. And I don't know anyone who does that successfully. And it's also never going to let your social anxiety rest, because if you're desperately seeking attention and approval from everyone, you're never going to leave your house. I mean, even as a teacher, I got really good evaluations. I had a lot of positive feedback from students. My courses went well, but there's always 1 to 2 people who had something nasty to say.
yeah.
And whether it was based on truth, like, mistakes I actually made, or what shoes I was wearing, I could not live and die by those evaluations because I wouldn't be able to do my job. And so there were certainly critiques that I took to heart and was like, these are things I can improve. But the really harsh things that had to do with my appearance, or not liking that I prefer to have conversations with students instead of lecture, those were things that, I decided were unimportant for me to worry about. But you actually have to choose to not worry about it, because people aren't going to give you a break. And so looking for people who do get you and who support you. If you want to wear a shirt everyone on the planet thinks is ugly, you know, wear that shirt around your people and you won't have to hear about it. Or you'll at least know it's not harsh.
Yeah. Yeah. I love this. I feel like there's so much reclaiming of power that can happen
Uh,
when we enter relationships that are obviously not like foolproof safe, but safer,
Right.
and that make us feel like we can be more of ourselves with less of those judgments. And I think that's what we all deserve. I have to remind myself, like, when I meet new people, I now have like boundaries. I now have like, here are the things that I can handle and that I can't. Teasing, joking, sarcasm, love it. But the people that are just kind of like energy vampires or like just always very critical, I can't be around that energy. I'm
Yeah.
like, the rest of the world is judging me. I don't want the people closest to me to be. It's like,
Right, and I also find it can be frustrating because a lot of times people are critical because they think they're helping you.
mm,
You know, the amount of times I've gotten unsolicited advice about how to cut my hair and how to wear makeup or what I should be wearing and should not be wearing. A lot of those people really did think, "Oh, I'm helping her out so she can fit in." But I don't want to fit in. I wanna look like me, and I want to, wear my stupid Paul Rudd t-shirts that I have or Ron Swanson t-shirts. And I don't care if I look like a lady or not. I'm happy to dress up for events like this, but there's also a lot of times in my life where I look however I want because it doesn't affect anyone.
yes. I love to touch back on this whole notion of fitting in.
Mm,
This culture that kind of, in my mind, is almost like it's like an infestation of the mind and the perspective of, like, prioritizing fitting in before your own, like, needs. And I've
mm,
seen so many people, like, suffer in so many ways and make sacrifices in so many ways. And one of the common things I hear from my students is the less they care about fitting in, it's almost like they feel more like there's less toxicity.
yeah. Yeah, because they are refusing to worry about social expectations. And I don't mean things like the law, don't get in a car after you've had drinks or, shoot anyone. But in terms of social norms, those are things that you know, at the heart are not that important. They give us a framework for how to act, but they're not legally required. So if I want to high five someone who comes to interview for a job at my company, it might seem a little unprofessional, but it's also okay and not that big of a deal. It's the problem with it would be the many assumptions made about me because of the high five. Though, frankly, one of the reasons I would high five instead of shake hands is because of COVID, and that's much quicker than
Yeah.
shaking hands.
Yeah. I love this. And I'm wondering if you have some advice or some kind of nugget of like something that, like maybe you would go back and tell your younger self, or something that you think maybe a listener might benefit from in terms of balancing having social anxiety and trying to get to that point of caring less. Like, I'll give a high five if I want. I don't care if people are going to judge me. Like, how do we get to that point from like socially anxious and needing and feeling like we need to fit in?
Well, I think number one for me has been asking people why things matter to them. And it gets under their skin, but a lot of times you can see a light bulb go on. Okay, if I'm wearing an outfit that isn't a brand name, which is pretty much everything I wear. I have no brand understanding or loyalty. If someone comments on that, I'll ask, like, is there a problem with my outfit? Is there something like, is what exactly is the issue outside of that? And oftentimes it's, well, it doesn't matter, but people might think that you don't have money. Well, I don't have money. And really just having a conversation about why that's bothering them so much simultaneously puts the onus on them to be the ones explaining as opposed to me. And it also shows that they don't have more power than me in this situation. So it can take some practice, and I would highly recommend small steps, but really just asking a question about why can can open you up to so many opportunities, and you can see who has the capacity to question themselves or deal with that questioning, or people who really do think that social norms are law, and it's probably not someone you want to spend a lot of time with because they're always going to be critical of what you do.
That is an amazing strategy to kind of feel out and assess almost how, like you just said, how someone is so closely like attached to these social norms that are, socially constructed versus people that are willing to kind of pause and also question.
Mhm.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah, if you can find people who are willing to reflect, then you have the potential for at least a decent conversation, if not a friendship or whatever else you're looking for.
I love that. So, for some of the people who are listening and, the conversation is resonating with them, how would you recommend or what would you kind of communicate to folks to help them feel more empowered?
Well, there's a lot of types of interpersonal power, but I find that most people who feel that they have a say over your life act as though they have legitimate power, meaning that they have some title or position in society that lets them tell you what to do and expect you to blindly obey, possibly because they have blindly obeyed. And so, like I was saying earlier, asking questions is a good way to just get them to think, or at least to get them to understand your perspective. And also, literally just living your life as you see fit is an excellent way to gain interpersonal power because at the end of the day, all the people who have yelled at me about not having kids, they're not going to pay for it financially. They're not going to carry the child. They are, and if they don't want to be in my life because they are horrified at the thought of a woman who doesn't want children, then that's fine. That's, I can create a boundary around my existence that doesn't include people who are horrified by childless women. And some of the people in my life have kids, some of the people don't, but they all understand that what I choose to do has no effect on them. And so even if you don't perfectly align with values or ideals, you can coexist, and that alone is interpersonal power. If no one's telling each other, you're garbage because you don't do the same thing I do, then that is a reason to at least have a connection with someone. And those are the kinds of people to look for because you will have power where it actually matters. The people who are going to yell and try to take power from you, like I said, you can question, but you can also just not engage with them at all. That is also an example of interpersonal power. Just saying, this isn't really an argument I want to get into, or I don't feel like I need to respond to that. Ooh, that is powerful because they really think that they have control over you and they don't.
They don't. They really don't.
Yeah.
Oh, that is so exciting to hear. And it just makes me feel kind of inspired and it makes me feel reminded. I think that's the better word I'm going to use. It
Mhm.
makes me feel reminded that I don't owe people anything, right?
Yeah. You live your life and you don't cause any problems. You're not robbing stores or committing murder. You're doing what you need to do for other people. And on top of that, you seem quite kind and pleasant. So I would say you're going an extra mile. And so you don't owe people anything else.
Thank you for saying that. I
Uh,
also feel like you're very compassionate and empathetic, and you got just a really beautiful energy about you. Can you tell me a little bit more about the work that you do to kind of help people now?
Yeah, the right now the majority of what I'm doing is one-on-one coaching sessions, but they're brief because my clients are socially anxious. And so we're really just spending time attacking whatever problem is bothering them the most.
Mhm.
Most of the solutions lie in emotionally separating yourself from a lot of society's standards and expectations and figuring out what you actually want. So a lot of it is just identity work, self esteem work. And I also am putting together a a site on Teachable called Social Anxiety Academy that'll be out August 15th. That's the release date. And it's going to be basically small communication lessons for socially anxious people. So, knowing what the symptoms are and having them myself, and what the psychology and communication research says, I'm, I just recorded earlier today 30 minutes about eye contact and why it's the worst. Why do we hate it so much if we're socially anxious? And how can you work on eye contact without triggering yourself into a worse situation than you're already in? So, those kinds of small lessons that allow for smaller wins is going to be a more affordable option for people who maybe don't have the money for one-on-one coaching.
Yeah, yeah. Oh my gosh, I love this. That is phenomenal. I need to have you I would love to have you come to my classes and talk to my students. I feel like social anxiety is like the new norm.
Oh my gosh, especially because of the pandemic.
Yeah,
My students were always socially anxious in my courses because you have to self-disclose, and a lot of them were public speaking, but I never saw anything like I've seen the past 2 years in terms
yeah,
of social
yeah.
anxiety.
Well, that is why I am so grateful that you're doing what you're doing. And I'll definitely circle back to shout out the courses that you're launching on August 15th. And I want to ask you, are there any points of the conversation that you want to go back and revisit, expand on? Is there anything that you want to add?
I would just add that, my situation with being child free is just one example of how people have a trouble thinking outside of whatever they were taught. And, you know, I know that it gets worse if you are a person of color or in the LGBTQ plus community, or, you are a child of immigrant parents. They have so many expectations that are not necessarily conducive to the reality of this country or whatever country you're in. And so, no matter what, there's going to be expectations that don't really jive with who you are, or you may just be seen as an aberration and be told that you don't belong at all anywhere. And so, if you don't work on caring about yourself. And I know the whole love yourself saying is out there and it's great, but I think if you're very socially anxious or you deal with depression, that seems so far outside your reality. But just, working on self-worth. I deserve to exist in public. I deserve to live my life as I see fit. If you can get that in your head, then those situations where people confront you are going to be a lot easier for you to manage because you know that they have no say at all.
And they don't have power over you.
Right. And even if it is someone like, say, a boss or a religious leader or a parent, they still only get so much say. I'll listen to my mother's opinions for longer, but I'm not going to have a kid for her. If my boss thinks that my clothing might suggest that I am trying to be younger than I am, I'll listen. But if there's not a dress code, I'm going to keep wearing what I'm wearing. So people can have distaste towards how you look and act and think and feel, but they don't get to control that most of the time.
And they shouldn't.
Yeah,
It's your life.
right. Go live your life.
Yes. Yes. You got to live your life. I have enjoyed this conversation so much. I feel like I could make a like 10-part series where we just cover so many different things with interpersonal communication. But I want to appreciate and thank you for today, being open to this conversation, sharing about you, who you are personally, the work that you're doing, and how communication kind of helped you navigate a lot of these a lot of these social pressures that just are ridiculous. So Thank you. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I'm happy to be here. I love that you're doing this for your students because a lot of professors don't go this far out of their way to put things like this together. So I wanted to be part of the conversation.
I'm glad you are. Sometimes I think my students are like, oh my gosh, this is so lame. Like, we have to listen to our teacher again outside.
Yeah. I understand that, but it's, a place where they already are, which is on their phone or on YouTube. So they shouldn't be too
Hopefully.
bothered by it.
Yeah, hopefully. Thank you so, 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 so much. I can't wait to have you back.